Baruch Hashem, you're a bad Jew.
Shalom.
Hey, come on in to Bad Jew, the place where there is no such thing as a bad Jew. With me today is none other than the esteemed Gila Ross. Gila, how are you today?
Thank you so much. I'm great. It's so great to be here with you on the Bad Jew podcast. I'm really, really excited for our conversation. Thank you for having me.
We're excited to have you too. We're excited to learn from you and grow from you. And before the show actually begins, there's a rite of entry onto the show. It's the 4-minute Bad Jew challenge where you tell your life story in 4 minutes. Are you ready?
I haven't slept for about a week worrying about this. So I'm as ready as I'll ever be, right?
You're going to do great. Trust me. Echad, shtaim, shalosh, yalla.
Thank you. So I'm Gila Ross, and I grew up as a religious Jew in a very religious community. I went to a all-girls religious school, and back in the day when I was growing up, I certainly grew up in a school where it wasn't quite okay to ask questions, which is kind of why I connected with you about the Bad Jew podcast, because I love the concept of it. And so growing up as a teenager, I kind of had these questions, yet I didn't really have anywhere to ask them. Questions like, how do we know that Judaism's true, right? How do we know there's a God, right? How do we know that Judaism's more true than other religions? And then when I was 15, I had a pivotal experience in my life, which was my father passed away. And it was obviously massive. He passed away suddenly. And one of the things that it really kind of made me realize is there were little things that kept on happening that kind of made me realize there is a God, right? And that God is involved in our lives. And one of the things that at that point I kind of decided is that, you know what, if I want to get answers, I'm going to have to start looking for those answers, right? And I wouldn't necessarily have the people, but I had access to books in those days that I don't think there were podcasts in those days, or even if they were, they weren't, gosh, I'm dating myself here, right? They weren't popular like they are nowadays, but there were tons of books, tons of really, really, really good books. And I started to learn, and I started to kind of fall in love with Judaism, right? There's so much beauty, meaning, makes sense of life. And as I was talking to my friends about it, we used to have these conversations as teenagers do. And at one point in my a friend turned around to me and she said, "Wow, you have such a great way of explaining things." And before that, I had never ever thought about teaching. It was like, as a kid, like teachers, like, who wants to be a teacher, right? And at that kind of moment, I was like, wow, you know what? She's right. Maybe I should go into teaching. And when I graduated high school, I went to seminary, and I finished that. I did start teaching. Fell in love with teaching. And when I got married to my husband and I both decided that we wanted to go and impact Jewish communities. We started off our married life in Israel. We were there for 2.5 years. We took a leadership training program while we were there. It's called Ner Aleph. And basically the way the program works is a 2-year program, and you make a 2-year commitment to go to a smaller community outside of Israel and take on a leadership role. So we took that on and we started the 2 years kind of turned out by now, I think, into 18 years or so. We lived in Germany. We also lived in Calgary, in Vancouver, in Manchester, UK, and we recently just moved to Denver. And we've had different leadership roles, in all those years, working with teenagers, with high school students, with college campuses, more recently with women and families I've been working with. And a few years ago, I think it's almost 5 years ago, I was teaching a class, and one of the participants was like, "This stuff is amazing. You should start a podcast." So I knew nothing about podcasts at the time, but I did know that if I didn't start, it would be one of those ideas that I had in my head that would never kind of actualize. So that very week, I Googled how to start a podcast. I started a podcast. Thank God it's grown. During COVID, I launched a series on pirkei avot. Pirkei avot is the part that really focuses on Jewish ethics and values, which launched the podcast. Like it hit the top Jewish podcast worldwide, which then turned into my book, Living Beautifully. And here I am.
That's amazing. Gila, you killed that 4-minute Bad Jew challenge. Well done. For those
Thank
who are
you.
yeah, no, and for those who are listening, be sure to check out her podcast on Apple Podcasts and your favorite podcasting platform. It is called Power Up: Ideas That Inspire by Gila Ross. Incredible show, very inspiring, very enlightening, absolutely awesome, and such a fun artwork as well. Gila, one thing I really liked as well is that I liked that you kind of capture one of the natures, one of the integral natures of what it means to be a Jew, which is that we're never satisfied with the basic answer. The basic, if you just give an answer, oh, we do this because blah blah blah, right? We're not satisfied with that answer. We ask more questions. We start applying more of the left brain logic and critical thinking that comes in our Judaism, innate within our culture. And by your own pursuit, you were able to ask those questions, and it's been absolutely amazing to see how it has taken you literally across the world as a globetrotter to come to this point of leadership and empowerment and to spread that education worldwide. So kol hakavod to you. You're doing really amazing work, Gila.
Thank you.
Of course. So we're here on this podcast to talk about what it means to practice Jewish mindfulness. What is Jewish mindfulness, Gila?
So it's a really, really great question that you're asking from about. And the way I kind of see it is that Jewish, Jewish mindfulness is very, very powerful because it gives us the tools to really understand and live our meaning, right? Everyone has a different meaning, and to live your meaning without getting this derailed. And it's kind of based on 6 principles, which I'll quickly run through with you. The first principle that it's based on is that you have a mission, right? Whoever you are, me, you, whoever's listening to the show, you have a mission, right? That's principle number 1, right? It's the first thing that we have to understand. When we wake up in the morning, you have a mission. We say that in the morning prayers, that God's, Rabba emunatecha, God, great is your faithfulness. We don't talk about our faith in God. The first thing we do when we wake up, we talk about God's faith in us, right? That God, you're here this morning, you're here right now listening to the show. It's because God believes that the world is incomplete without you. So that's number 1, right? Which is a very powerful understanding, right? The second thing is that the second principle of it is there's only one way to be successful in life. And I'll explain a little bit about what I mean by that. Is that we often think that, we have a mission, whatever, there are different ways to be successful, right? You can be successful by doing the right thing, or you can be successful by cheating, doing other things that you shouldn't really be doing, right? And we think we should do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. The thing that we have to understand, right, is that it's not true. There's only one right way to be successful, right? And that is through living your meaning, right? And we see this all the time, right? And we don't necessarily register it, but we see it all the time. We see, people who become big by putting other people down, or by cheating, or by doing things they shouldn't, and then boom, it disappears, right? There's all of a sudden something happens and it falls out. And we don't necessarily kind of recognize it, but I think it's really important to understand that there's only one way to be successful. The third principle that we have to understand is that everything that happens in our life is there to help us live our meaning, live our mission. What do I mean by that is, I don't know if this has ever happened to you. Definitely happened to me that I'm like all gung-ho, today's going to be a great day. I'm going to, get whatever I need to get done. I'm going to be calm, I'm going to be patient, I'm going to be kind. I'm a mom of kids, right? And then boom, right? Something happens. The kid can't find the shoes, the car won't start, something happens. And we kind of like, oh my gosh, I was trying so hard. And then, life got in the way, right? The thing, what Jewish mindfulness teaches us and what Judaism teaches us is that not that it got in the way, that is the way, right? What does it mean there, right? Is that firstly, have you ever experienced that life gets in the way?
Oh, of course, all the time. I had plans yesterday to have a very different evening than I actually experienced. And the reason why is because I just hadn't been getting good sleep. Life got in the way and my body was crashing on me. And it literally said, no, you want to go out tonight. You can't. You need to sleep tonight. Something as simple as that. There have been better examples as time has gone on, but literally the most obvious example I could think of is the fact that I literally had a pounding migraine that was saying to me, no, you need your rest.
And can I use that example to kind of
Sure.
illustrate what this means, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that, let's just say, I don't know where you were planning on going, right? But there was probably something good that you were gonna get out of it or whatever, right? And we kind of think, you know what, that's gonna take me closer to my mission, right? And what God does is saying, you know what, maybe what you need to work on right now is allowing your body to rest. Maybe what you need to work on right now is the flexibility of, you know what, things don't go the way I want, but I can accept it, right? Maybe the way I want to go, what I want, God says, what you need in your life to fulfill your mission is to work on accepting God's will over my will. And usually it's harder, right? The job there is harder than it would be to just kind of, I had an experience once when I was making a meal for someone, right? And they just had a baby, right? And I was like, okay, great. I'm going to work on being kind and being giving. And actually, what happened was, I think that I took it out of the oven and it fell on the floor, right? And what God was saying, actually, I'm going to give you a little exercise to work on your frustration tolerance. Much harder, right? I want to work on the kindness. I'll leave the frustration tolerance for it. But it's such, when we can really internalize this mindset that everything is the way, it lets go of so much stress, because we can kind of, can let go of that frustration of like, oh my gosh, this is standing in my way. I can't believe I've got this migraine and I've got to cancel XYZ, right? No, it's like, okay, I've got this. What do I do now? Right? So it's a very, very powerful mindset. The fourth principle of Jewish mindfulness is that everything that is happening to us is for our goods, right? What's this based on? It's based on the idea that God created the world out of nothing, right? And he had no reason to create the world, but he created the world, and that's an act of love and kindness, right? And everything that kind of happens is for our good. Doesn't mean we necessarily see it or understand it, but there's a beauty to even just knowing it, right? The fifth principle of Jewish mindfulness is that you and your actions matter, right? That everything you do is important, has an impact, and it's a very, I don't know what the right word is, weighty way to live your life, because it means that we kind of realize before we do something, after we do something, that it's not just, oh, do whatever, but like, yeah, what I'm going to do is going to have an impact, right? And again, we can talk a little bit more about it, because it's not supposed to be a debilitating fear. It's supposed to be a motivating thing, right? Because God gives us ways to fix mistakes, etc., etc. And the sixth principle about it is not to get sidetracked, right? Which what does that mean? Is that, again, I don't know if this has ever happened to you. Definitely happened to me. I know exactly what I should do or exactly what I shouldn't do. And then I go and do that thing, right? That I shouldn't do. Why? Why do we do it if we know it, right? Because
Right.
knowledge isn't enough. It's a great step, right? The first 5 principles are great steps to really internalize and work on and implement into our lives. But it's not enough, right? After that, we also have to be very aware of and mindful of how we set up our environment, who we set up in our circles, right? Because all these sort of things have an impact on us.
So here's where I have a little bit of difficulty in what you're describing, because I think, to summarize a lot of these principles, it's a lot of accepting what is given to you as a test. That's a very much a growth mindset that I've heard before, that what is happening is meant to be, and ultimately what you want will happen in its time. Or simultaneously, and this is me speaking partly as an entrepreneur, partly as a content creator, partly as someone who is now the chief marketing officer of HLA, these things wouldn't have happened if I didn't go out of my way to take initiative. And that's because I wasn't satisfied with my current place. That's because, and I think other people listening probably will experience something similar, that they, where they are now in their lives, they might not be satisfied either. And that they know the only way to get out of those places will be to take initiative. Same with yourself, by the way. You even said it during your 4 minute bad you challenge, which is that you had this idea. Once someone planted the seed of that you need to create a podcast called PowerUp, right? You couldn't start that until you were until it was an idea that you couldn't get out of your head, and so you took initiative. How do you differentiate between the dissatisfaction of not taking initiative to the point where you need to take initiative to letting life happen, so to
So
speak?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because you're right, right? And I think that you started off with saying two statements, right? And one statement was that everything that happens, is something that we can grow from and grow through. The other statement that you said, that it will happen, things that you want will happen anyway, is not a part of Jewish mindfulness, right? And it's not a part of Jewish tradition either. And that's where the principle number 5 comes in, right? That
Mm.
we matter, right? And basically, what are these principles based on? They're based on, there's 6 constant mitzvahs in Judaism, right? There are 6 mitzvahs that we're supposed to be thinking about all the time. Now, you hear this concept and you might think to yourself, that's crazy, right? Like, we are busy, distracted as it is. And now you want me to think about 6 things at the same time? Like, how are we supposed to do it? The idea here is kind of like, you remember learning to drive a car,
Sure, of course.
right? In the beginning, I learned to drive manual. I'm from the UK, right? We have manual cars, right? So in the beginning, you have to, you have to put so much effort into it and so much thought into it, right? And you're thinking and like, oh my gosh, I've got to change, I've got, which one is the brake, which one is the accelerator? What happens over time is it becomes part of our subconscious, right? And what happens sometimes is you get home and you're like, oh my gosh, who drove the car home? Right. Or, it's just autopilot. And that's the idea with these principles, is that they're supposed to be ideas that we keep on internalizing so that they influence our actions. But what is the idea of you matter? What is that based on? It's based on the mitzvah of Yirat Hashem, Yirat Shemaim. What does that mean? It means, we translate it as fear of God, right? And we don't have time to delve into it. I've got episodes of my podcast where people can hear more about it. But very briefly, what does it mean? It means that there are things that we should fear and there are things that we shouldn't fear, right? We shouldn't fear what's going to happen to us, not because it's going to be okay, because we don't know. It might not be okay. Judaism doesn't give us any guarantees that it'll be okay. So why shouldn't we fear it? Because no matter what happens, we can make meaningful. Now, the choice is ours, right? You've done things, right? You could have had this idea of Bad Jew podcast and never actioned on it, right? And then, and then it wouldn't have happened. And interestingly, Judaism, you talk about bad Jew, right? And most times when people feel like they're a bad Jew, where does that come from?
The shame, well, there's a few places, but it's the shame that people give them for not practicing a certain way, or it's an easier title to tell themselves as an excuse to not continue to pursue their own journey.
Yeah.
Or, there's a lot of places it comes from. It also
Yeah.
comes from non-Jewish spaces, where
Interesting.
especially nowadays you have people trying to gaslight Jews and they're thinking that they're bad Jews for supporting Israel when they just have a whole agenda to gaslight us.
Yeah. And then it's true. And what you've highlighted is, it very often comes from a place of like, oh my gosh, I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing, right? I am eating non-kosher. I am, telling tales about, I'm gossiping. I am driving on Shabbat, whatever it is, right? Interestingly, if you look into Judaism, someone sins, there's a way to fix it, right? God gives us the 4-step teshuva return process where you can fix what you've done wrong. But the bigger thing is the things that we fail to do, right? When we fail to take action, that is very hard to fix. There's a story about a rabbi called the Netziv, right? And he wrote lots and lots of books that people still study today. And at one of, older on in his life, he gave a siyum where people celebrate, that he wrote a book, published it. And he got up and he spoke and he told his story. He said, when I was a kid, I was not a well-behaved kid, right? And my parents, he grew up in Europe where education was a privilege, right? His parents were paying for him and they realized that he was not gaining anything out of being in school. So one day he overhears a conversation between them and his parents. He overhears his parents saying, look, he's not really doing well in school. It's a waste of our money. Let's take him out and teach him a trade. And the Netziv had a wake-up call, right? And he realized, oh my gosh, right? This is my moment. And he came downstairs, he spoke to his parents, he says, give me one more chance, right? I'm going to go and I'm going to take it seriously. And he said at the same, he said, fast forward, what would have happened had my parents sent me to trade school, right? I would have grown up as a good Jew, right? I would have had a trade. I would have been religious. He came from a religious family. I would have kept Shabbat. I would have probably been careful about what I eat, careful about what I speak about, right? All these things. And yet, at the end of my life, I would have gone up to heaven and God would have shown me all these books and said, where are the books that you were supposed to create? And he said, I would have said, I don't know what you're talking about, right? And what does this story show us is that life is full of opportunity and potential, and it's up to us to actualize that potential because there's no guarantees that it's going to happen for us, right? If you do the work, right, and you put in the effort and it doesn't happen, maybe there's something you can learn from it. Maybe it's going to happen later. Maybe it's not supposed to happen for you. But the part that and again, the part that I think Jewish mindfulness really focuses on is that you are the agent of your life, right? Yes, there are things that happen to us, but we choose how we respond to those things and what meaning we can sort of learn from those things.
So I like that idea. I think that there's a lot to expand on and grow from hearing something like that. But here's, again, another place where I struggle is how can you even conceive your potential? We as human beings, we're just mere mortals. We are not benevolent. We're not ubiquitous like Hashem is, right? So there's no way that I could possibly even know what my purpose is in life or what my potential is to grow to. And I think there's a lot of double-edged sword. I'm gonna phrase it as a double-edged sword messaging, where there's a lot of posts and messages that you see on social media that encourage people to relax and take a breath, which is good for mental health. But too much of that, of course, can turn someone into a glutton, or turn someone's life into a gluttonous lifestyle, or turn them into total sloth where they just become lazy. So where do you find the balance, and how do you reflect enough to even potentially understand what your potential could be?
So firstly, great questions, really great questions. Secondly, I agree with you. We don't know what our potential is. We don't, right? And more than that is we often don't know what success is or isn't, right? We don't really know how to define success. I had a friend of mine, she a couple of years ago, she had a baby and the baby was in low on oxygen, very, very stressful time when the baby was born, as you can imagine, for a family. And she said to me after, she's like, well, obviously it was a challenge for us, but I don't think it brought out the best in us. And as a friend, I listened to that and I'm like, what are you talking about, right? Like, what does it mean to bring out the best in a situation like that? Oh, she had 2 other kids, right? So are you going to be more short-tempered with your other kids? Yeah, like, duh, you're under a lot of stress, right? Like, how do you define success in a situation like that? I don't know, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes just staying in the fight is success, right? I think, from what we learned from Judaism, God is compassionate, right? He's a lot more compassionate on us than we are on ourselves a lot of times. So we don't know what our potential is. We don't necessarily know what success is or isn't. But what we can sort of take responsibility for is our efforts, right? Can I put in the effort? Did I do something good? Great. Is there something that I need to fix? Great. Acknowledge it and move forward. And the other point that you brought up about balance is spot on, right? Spot on. Because if you learn about Judaism and character development, like there's nothing in the world that is either good or bad, right? Give me a character trait.
Determined.
Determined. Is it good or bad?
I would say being determined is a good thing.
What if you're determined to create a Holocaust like Hitler?
Okay, fair.
It's terrible, right?
You may have a point there.
Yeah. Right. What am I trying to the point that I'm trying to make is it's not about the character trait, it's about how we use it, right? And we talk about it's not actually good or bad, it's more or less powerful, right? If someone is a bit determined, they're a bit that's powerful. If someone's very determined, it's very powerful. And if it's good or bad, depends how they use it. And that's what Judaism requires from us is be thoughtful, be intentional, be mindful about what's going on and what is the response that's required from you in this situation. And it's going to be different for you or for me, right? Some people, you ask them to do something and their immediate reaction is yes. And for them, being mindful means taking a pause and saying, actually, maybe I should be saying no in this situation for that thing, right? For other people, their automatic response is no, right? And for them, being mindful means pausing and sort of asking the question, maybe I should be saying yes in that thing. And it varies depending on the situation, right? So that's your balance. It's absolutely all about balance because nothing is good or bad. It's how we channel it, how we choose to use it, and what's the correct response for you in this very situation.
I really love your answer. I think it's really wise. I think it's really smart. I think it's a great way to acknowledge the balance that we need in our lives, pointing out that no trait is a good or bad trait. It's just a trait. It depends on how you use it. Well said. Where can people even begin though? Because to say these things is one thing, but to act on them is different. What's a good place for people to start?
It's a very, very good question. So if you want to delve deeper into it, I definitely have more a series on my podcast on these 6 principles. People ask that question of where do I begin? Always begin at the easiest place for you, right? So because we always want consistency over quantity, right? Over thing, right? It's better to do the easiest thing, right? And do it consistently than to do something hard and just do it once. It's kind of like going to the gym, right? You go to the gym, you have a fantastic workout and don't go back for 3 months, you're not going to see so much benefit, right? If you go 5 minutes, 10 minutes, right? A good class is not great, it's good, right? But it's something that you can work into your life 3 times a week and you do that consistently, you're going to see the benefits much more, right? So how do you start? What was the easiest? What was the one that kind of message, connected with you the most? And see if you can kind of incorporate it into your life a little bit. I'll also give a very, very, very powerful tool that's easy to do and that kind of can start the way to do it. And this is called, in Judaism, there's a concept called cheshbon hanefesh, right? Which is kind of like a spiritual accounting. Right. So just like, if you're running a business, you're running your own finances, right? At some point, you're going to, at least annually, you're going to take a look at your finances and see what's healthy, what's not, right? If you're more on top of things, you'll do it once a month. If you're more on top of it, you'll do a quick look in daily. So what's cheshbon hanefesh? It's the same thing. We take a look at our spirituality, right? How am I doing as a person, right? What is the legacy that I want to leave? And how am I moving towards that? So ideally, we do this once a month in depth, that coming up to the high holidays. There's also a concept of doing it once a month, which is Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the new Jewish month. There's a very easy way to begin this process that is a daily practice. What is that? Is end of the day, right? Before you go to sleep, jot down 3 things. Number 1, something that I'm grateful for, right? Something that happened today that I'm grateful for. Okay, and try and do a different thing every single day. It doesn't have to be mind shattering. It doesn't have to be, just take a moment. Like, I'm grateful I could see today. I'm whatever it is. I'm grateful that I have a pillow, like anything. Second thing is something that you did well, right? Because we often, again, we often kind of think about, self-development, improvement, about what do I need to do better? You always have to appreciate what you're doing well. What did I do well today? What am I proud of, right? And again, it doesn't have to be something mind-shattering. It could be, you know what? This person said something and I was so tempted to give them such a good one-liner back. That would have been so helpful. And I took a deep breath, right? That's a win. Celebrate it, right? And the third thing is there something that I did today that I need to improve on, right? And if there is something that you did that day, to up level this a little bit, is look at, what do I need to do to fix it, right? If I hurt someone else's feelings, do I need to apologize to them? Did I borrow something from someone else and not return it? Return it, right? The real growth happens when you look at it and sort of try and figure out what led to it, right? I said something that I shouldn't have said. What led to it? Was it because I responded too fast and I need to learn to pause, right? So the very minimum, do this daily, right? Daily practice, start with 3 things, something I'm grateful for, something I did well, and something that I can improve on. And if you want to, spend an extra, a little bit of time on the thing that I did wrong. What happened that allowed that mistake to happen? Because that's where we can learn to do differently, right? If I yelled at my kid because I was stressed about time, right, then maybe I need to allow myself more time in future.
Amazing, Gila. I think that's all incredible advice, and I know that there's golden nuggets here that people who are listening will be able to take with them, dissect, and be able to implement into their own lives. You gave some very versatile, very helpful, very high functioning pieces of wisdom from Torah, from pirkei avot, as you pointed out. Really well said. Something I also want to share and relate to is that in 2019 I had my big lawsuit. It was my first claim to fame in the Jewish community, known as Volk versus CSU Board of Trustees. I was going up against my old college for the anti-Semitism that I was experiencing on the campus there. Whole long story about how all that unfolded. And you can find it on Google when you type in Volk versus CSU Board of Trustees. But I remember going up to Rabbi Jack and Shira, who, Gila, you know very well.
Yes.
I was involved with them at Ashlit. And I remember saying to them right before heading up to San Francisco for this lawsuit, Rabbi, how do I pray? Because I didn't know how to pray and I was getting nervous. And I realized there's actually a spiritual battle here that is underlying that hasn't really been acknowledged. I was secular at the time. I was just involved with secular. And Rabbi Jack, his wisdom that he gave me was, he said, before you go to bed, find 3 things that you're thanking Hashem for and 3 things that you're willing to forgive others for.
Beautiful.
And I don't practice prayer that way anymore. I practice it differently. But for anyone who was listening, who was looking for something practical as well, that's another way in which you can implement mindfulness that I personally took on. I wouldn't have called it mindfulness back then, but realizing it now based on what you just described, I think that also applies to the whole mindfulness theme that we have going on here. It's a really great, relevant piece of wisdom here that you've given us, Gila. Thank you so much for being on the show. For those who are listening, be sure to check out her podcast called PowerUp, Ideas That Inspire, a podcast by Gila Ross on your favorite podcast platform. Also, be sure to check her out on Instagram at It's Gila Ross. Gila, thank you for being on the show. Any final words before we send off?
Thank you so much for having me on the show. And thank you for putting out this awesome podcast, the community that you have and I want to also thank everyone that's taking the time to listen, because really that, you asked what we could do. And I think I forgot to mention this, but exactly what you're doing right now by you working to inspire others tremendous amount of work goes into a podcast. For everyone who's tuning in and listening, right? By choosing, you could be doing anything, right? You're choosing to listen to something that's going to upgrade your spirituality. That's something to celebrate. So thank you everyone for listening.
Gila, thanks again for being on the podcast. And to the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to check out the Bad Jew WhatsApp community, a safe space to express your Judaism, a place where you can ask questions, a place where you can workshop ideas with other Jews around the world who are interested in this show. Be sure to also check out our merch store, badjew.co. That is co, not com, but co, where you can buy merchandise that supports our Bad Jew movement. Gila, again, thank you for being on the podcast. And to the listeners, we'll see you next Wednesday.
Shalom.